So lately I've been diving back into old PlayStation games, not just for a hit of nostalgia, but also to break up the cycle of playing modern releases in my free time. From the wacky, kid-friendly fun of Crash Bandicoot and Ape Escape to the darker, more intense experiences of Resident Evil 2 and Metal Gear Solid, revisiting those classics for the past few weeks has been a wild ride. But we're not going to go over any of them in this video. Instead, there's this one game that I want to talk about, not because of its story or cultural impact, but because of how ridiculously fun and unique the gameplay is. That game is SilentBomber.
You don't have to scream, I can hear you.
Developed in 1999 by CyberConnect, the very same developer behind the Dot Hack series, and before their name changed to CyberConnect 2, this game was the studio's first attempt and an action-heavy experience after releasing Tail Concerto a year prior. In contrast to Tail Concerto's bright, cartoony visuals, SilentBomber opts for more high-octane action with a sci-fi edge. Talk about its own whiplash, huh? Going from this
I've been looking forward to a day off for a long time. How am I going to spend it?
to this.
Those are... But I thought there were soldiers in here! These people are civilians!
Although it never reached the lofty, iconic status of Metal Gear or Resident Evil, I think SilentBomber's uniqueness makes it one of the most underrated action games of the original PlayStation. So, with that said, allow me to share with you what makes the game special, what holds it back, and whether it's still worth revisiting in 2025. If I am to describe SilentBomber in one sentence, I'd probably say it's a top-down action game where you fight using bombs instead of guns. And while that's technically true, it undersells just how intricate and kinetic the actual gameplay loop is. That said, the core mechanics do revolve around placing bombs, either on the ground or directly planting them onto enemies with the assistance of a lock-on system, then making them go boom with the press of a button. Now, unlike your standard shooter, where precision aiming is everything, here it's all about movement, positioning, and timing. The more bombs you can stack onto a target before detonation, the bigger the explosion and the more damage you can deal. Oh yeah, and just like how it goes in Bomberman, you can get caught in the blast radius of your own bombs if you aren't careful. That said though, this cathartic, bomb-centric mechanic never fails to make me grin from ear to ear whenever I can blow stuff up in a fiery, over-the-top explosion, watching entire squads of enemies and targets decimated in a firestorm while moving about and dodging any projectiles coming my way. Besides your standard bombs, you can also pick up various liquid bombs scattered throughout the levels. The napalm liquid, the red one, produces flames that deal AoE damage for a few seconds, perfect for stationary targets. The purple gravity liquid generates a vortex that pulls in enemies or projectiles within range to trap them and deal damage. And lastly, the blue paralysis liquid can immobilize any electronics for a few seconds, creating a window for you to either press on with the attack or evade and reposition yourself. As for your maneuverability, instead of doing double jumps like in typical action platformers, you can jump dash Mega Man style to avoid any incoming projectiles and keep your distance in combat. An insanely useful move, especially during boss fights at later levels. From the looks of it so far, it seems that your character is pretty OP, yeah? Well, not exactly. To make things balance, there's a limited energy pool that dictates how many bombs you can place at a time, so there's bound to be a constant back and forth in the strategy, choosing between aggression and restraint throughout your playthrough. Do you go all in with a huge blast for maximum damage, or would you rather play it safe and chip away at their health with smaller explosions, even if it risks fighting for longer? Not to mention that most enemies have force fields that make them immune to your bombs at specific intervals, forcing you to pick your time instead of being all gung-ho and aggressive. Overall, I think the balance keeps the moment-to-moment combat engaging and far from being boring all the way through. Oh yeah, and speaking of engaging, wouldn't you believe that the game has a great upgrade system to complement the action? So there are these items called E-chips that you can find scattered throughout the levels. They are basically collectibles to increase the upgrade points that you can allocate to 3 areas. Bomb, indicating the maximum number of bombs that you can plant at a time for detonation. Range, the lock-on distance for aiming your bombs. And shield, essentially your armor to help reduce damage taken. The number of E-chips you need to add 1 block to an area will scale incrementally as you upgrade further. So there's an incentive to explore each level thoroughly to find all of the E-chips. What's great about it is, you don't need to commit to what's been allocated. You're free to switch and customize each upgrade area to suit what you need, even during gameplay, by accessing the pause menu. For example, if there's an enemy that flies and requires further lock-on capabilities to take on, prioritize dumping the E-chips on range instead on the 2 other areas. Or perhaps when you face a particularly tough boss, you can up the amount of E-chips on armor to beef up your health. I like that this upgrade system is flexible enough that you are free to mix and match based on what you need. And before long, you're gonna need to do so because, oh boy, the difficulty in the latter half of the game can be a nightmare, but we'll get to it later.
Is this really the end? Roger that. I'm going back out.
The game has around 14 levels in total, ranging from the usual go from point A to point B, destroy designated targets, sometimes within a time limit, to mini arenas where you're essentially tasked to survive and eliminate all enemies. Each level is capped with a boss battle, usually in the form of a stronger version of the enemies you face in the level. For instance, in the first level, the boss you face will be a larger version of the spider tanks, and in the second, the boss will be a large turret that fires a massive laser. Some bosses have excellent designs and gimmick, like the giant mecha on level 11, where you aim your bombs at the spinning blades and detonate them once the blades are retracted to inflict damage, or the giant tank on level 7, where you can only target it in specific weak spots to lower its HP. Okay, now that you get the gist of how it plays, let's move on to the game's narrative. The story follows Utah Fate, former soldiers and on a mission to infiltrate and take down a colossal space dreadnought named Dante. Joining Utah on his mission is a diverse team consisting of Benoit, a political revolutionary and a guy who's really into chess and definitely not someone whom will fight as a boss later on.
Benoit.
I thought I would save you the trouble and effort by ordering the test subject to deal with them.
Next, we have Vicino, a professional spy with shady motives.
My, how disturbing. Planning to burn your friends too?
Pacino. Aren't you supposed to be backing up the lieutenant?
Yeah, but she's been captured.
John, skilled fighter and escape artist.
That doesn't change the fact that you risked your own life in order to rescue us. Thanks.
Tim, a highly strung ace pilot.
So we're your backup, right?
And Henri, a computer specialist and the mission's commanding officer.
I'll wager that there's not even 10% of the 30,000 crew members left now.
As you might expect, as is often the case with stories about a ragtag team on a mission, things usually don't go according to plan. In fact, it goes south pretty quickly early on, and Utah gets separated from his team after their ship gets shot down by Dante's powerful anti-aircraft defenses. Stranded and on his own, he now must rely on his demolition skills to continue the mission and bring down the mighty dreadnought. If you are even remotely familiar with late 90s sci-fi anime tropes, you'll probably recognize the story beats from a mile away. There's going to be a tragic backstory, moments of betrayal, conspiracies, and the main character being portrayed as angsty as aloof. Yeah, you get the idea. As for the story, it's it's fine. It's not exactly groundbreaking, and while the cutscenes have a certain nostalgic charm to them, the voice acting is kind of rough, to put it nicely. Think early PlayStation English dubs where every line delivery sounds either completely flat or way too exaggerated. It doesn't ruin the experience, but it definitely dates the game.
The 3rd Platoon's lander is heavily damaged. Damn it, talk about bad luck.
Pacino, quit complaining.
The 6th platoon is gone! How can this be happening?
Tim, stop your whining.
Unfortunately, just like the narrative presentation, not everything in SilentBomber has aged gracefully. One of the noticeable issues for me is the camera. While it mostly does a decent job of keeping up with the action, there are times when the fixed perspective works against you, obscuring enemies or making it difficult to gauge distances properly. Like for instance, during the labyrinth section halfway through the game, the camera is far too zoomed in that you can't really see what's right in front of you, forcing you to always engage with the lock-on system and spam your bombs to avoid any nasty surprises ahead. And then there are the occasional platforming sections. This game was designed entirely around fast-paced combat with little verticality, so the moments where it forces you to jump across gaps feel somewhat clunky and out of place. Not to mention that the wall jump ability is pretty useless outside of those platforming sections. Luckily, there are few and far between, but when they do pop up, they kind of break the game's pacing. Oh yeah, and then there's the surprising difficulty curve. You see, SilentBomber isn't afraid to punish mistakes, and some of the later levels near the game's end can be quite frustrating out of nowhere, especially if you're already comfortable with the game's mechanics up to that point. For instance, the biomutant enemies that you face in the second half of the game. Unlike the mechanized units and stationary turrets you've gotten used to from previous levels, these biomutants are immune to the blue paralysis bombs and can only be stunned by the red napalm or purple vortex bombs, essentially making one of your arsenals useless against them. Furthermore, if you lock on to them and destroy their bladed hands, you will no longer be able to lock on to them again, thus forcing you to adopt another strategy of planting a chain of bombs near them instead. Also, this is just a personal pet peeve of mine, but did I mention that there are a couple of levels where you protect NPCs from a constant barrage of enemies for a specific time limit? Considering that the NPCs have their own health bars too, and they can be damaged by your bombs as well, needless to say, I failed quite a lot on my first playthrough. Add the biomutant enemies into the mix, and you might have got yourself a headache-inducing experience that tests your patience. I mentioned previously that the bosses are pretty great to fight against, but brace yourself once you enter the last level, because before the final boss battle, there's a gauntlet where you face multiple mini-bosses in succession in the form of moving chess pieces, each with specific attack pattern that come at you simultaneously. It's an ultimate test of player skills in movement and bomb placement, I give it that, but damn does it murder your thumbs after multiple retries. Despite the shortcomings, one area where I think SilentBomber shines is replayability. The game grades your performance on every level, and once you complete the game, you're free to go back to previous levels with the same upgrade from your previous playthrough. There's a lot of fun to be had here, especially if you are the type who loves chasing high scores. And beyond that, the mechanics are just so satisfying that it's kind of fun to revisit levels and try new strategies. Oh yeah, and as a reward for completing the game, you can unlock a versus mode, with some characters and enemies from the game becoming playable. Each has its own control scheme and means to attack. Quite like how characters in a typical fighting game play. Granted, it's more of a novelty than a core feature, but it's there if you want it. So, is SilentBomber worth playing today? Yeah, absolutely. It's a short, explosive experience that still feels unique over 2 decades later. The bomb-based combat is as satisfying as ever, and while some of the design choices haven't aged well, they are what I would call small bumps in an otherwise smooth ride. In summary, if you can look past the occasional jank and tolerate the difficulty spike, SilentBomber is a hidden gem that deserves more recognition. So if you ever come across a copy, I implore you to give it a shot. You might be surprised by just how much fun it still is. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This is the first long-form video I've made in quite a while since my last upload, so I hope you don't mind if it turns out to be a bit rough around the edges. Anyway, if you enjoy this type of game review, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. You can also support me on Saweria and Ko-fi to help me continue creating videos for the channel. The links are all in the description below. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments along with any suggestions or feedback for what you'd like to see next. I would love to hear from you all. Again, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.